Good evening. My name is Noel Solani, and I'm a researcher at the Mzala Nxumalo Centre for the study of South African society. For the next coming days until Saturday, we will be together and hoping that we will have constructive and fruitful discussions. Just to talk about a little bit about Mzala Nxumalo Centre. The center's vision is to be a center of left-wing thought and practice. And I see there are a lot of people wearing red caps. Probably they know what left-wing means. So I don't have to translate that. But the mission of the institution is to promote the national question through political and academically sound research, training, and public engagement. Meaning that at the center of the research that the institution is doing is the national question as it translates today, and it will translate tomorrow. And our objectives and principle is to embark on a focused research agenda that will address various aspects of life of South African society, to generate and publish high-quality research will resonate with societal needs, to enhance research through collaboration with other institutions, both public and private, meaning that in what we do not intend to do all research on this question, but is to form collaboration with various institutions of higher learning, with other research institutes, with individuals that are interested in this particular, on the national question, etc. And it is also to provide space for constructive debate and public engagement. I think the space we are in today and which we are opening is that particular space that we want to open so that people from different ideological persuasions can come together in a safe space and debate events, issues, and contradictions in our society today. And I think it's only through the understanding of those contradictions that society moves forward. And I think with those few words, you are welcomed. The first speaker who will do introductory remarks will be Jabulani Sithole, who's our newly appointed Chief Executive Officer and who guides the research agenda of the institution. And after him will be Dr. John Pampalis, who's the chairperson of the Mzala Nxumalo Centre. And then we will have a performance by Dumi Khumalo and another performance by Abahlali Basemjondolo. And then after that, we are all invited to dinner. Thank you very much. You won't see me again on the podium.
Surely this is taller than me. Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Program Director. I understand you don't want to be up here. The Mzala Nxumalo family, especially Umamumpo and other family members, the board members, the chairperson, John Pampalis, Judge Nicholson, Dr. Vukile Khumalo, and others, if I've actually missed them, the staff of the Mzala Nxumalo Centre for the study of the South African society, the delegates, and all. Let me also take this opportunity to welcome and thank you all for making time to be here over the next 2.5 days. That is today, tomorrow, and Saturday. We are actually gathered here over the next 2 days to discuss a topic that is extremely important, not only in South Africa, but in the African continent and the world over. It's a topic that looks at the future of the left in the early 21st century. As you might have actually seen in the note, the concept note that was circulated, There is no doubt that we are witnessing, not only in South Africa, but the world over, growing social inequalities, wherein a handful of people are actually responsible for the wealth, whilst the vast majority of our people, both in South Africa and abroad, are actually languishing in poverty. In South Africa, we're actually bombarded on an ongoing basis with quite a number of very grim sort of realities that we are facing. In this country, for an example, we all know, I'm restating something that is well known, that just under 10 million people are actually unemployed. And the statistics that have actually come out show that very clearly. And the vast number of people are actually living in very serious poverty. And these statistics can actually be applied the world over. Only a handful of people in this country, few families, are not only owning the means of production and in charge of the economy, but they are also involved in many ways, both at a level of the generation of this economy. They are actually focusing primarily at maximizing their profit at the expense of the vast majority of people who are not actually enjoying any fruits of whatsoever is actually being generated in that economy. Not only in South Africa, we're witnessing this very grim sort of reality. We are told that in North America, only about 1% of the people in the United States are in charge of the economy, whilst 99% have got to do at least 3 jobs just to make a living. In addition to that, we are witnessing not only the rise of your very conservative ideas, which pose a very serious challenge on those of us who are gathered here today, to actually think about our position quite seriously. We are seeing the rise of right-wing parties in quite a number of places, meaning, in other words, they are actually very determined to impose the hegemony, a hegemony that they actually gained between the late 90s and the late 80s and the early 90s with the collapse of an alternative. At the time, it was the Soviet Union that was actually at least providing, no matter how we look at that, an alternative to a hegemony that is dominant, a capitalist hegemony. We're actually seeing also the disintegration of even your social democratic sort of organizations and the parties actually becoming extremely weak. So the question, of course, becomes quite serious for us to actually contemplate and think critically about as to what it is that can be done to ensure that at least we are focused. And as a center, the Mzala Centre, as the programs director was saying, would like to provide a space where we begin to look at these issues and ask very serious questions, especially because we are about a cadre who actually came to the fore in the trenches of the struggle. Mzala Nxumalo was and is known to have been a person who asked very difficult questions, who never shied away from challenging the status quo, and ensured that at least he was thinking outside the box. And our challenge, of course, over the next 2 days is to ask ourselves, if Mzala Nxumalo were to be amongst us today, what would he say about the state capture debates that are actually taking place, the corporatism that is actually dominating everyone, the social inequalities that are confronting us as a society, the poverty that is facing our people? Because clearly, the dreams that we had of a better life for all is actually fast receding. And there is therefore a need for those that are progressive to actually think critically. And I hope over the next 2.5 days, we'll be able to share ideas, share views, and be able to come with an idea of what it is that can be done to ensure that those that are seeing themselves as subscribing to the left thinking are actually reorganizing themselves, not only within South Africa, but networking globally to see how we can actually begin to challenge the hegemony of your capitalists that are actually exploiting our people on an ongoing basis. And in those words, I would like to actually step down and say thank you all, and I hope you'll enjoy yourself over the next 2 days.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair, for introducing me after saying that you weren't going to introduce me. But I'm John Pampalis. I'm the chair of the Mzala Centre. Dr. Sithole, members of the board, of the staff of the Mzala Centre, everybody who's here this evening. I'm really glad to see such a large turnout tonight. And the purpose of this conference is to consider the state of the political left and to discuss ways of strengthening it. While the main focus of the conference is on South Africa, we recognize that the country exists in a global context, and that what happens in South Africa is influenced and sometimes even determined by what happens elsewhere. You may have noticed from the program, and even from just looking around you, that nearly all participants come from left-wing backgrounds. However, they come from a variety of organizations and tendencies that don't necessarily agree with each other. This is not by accident. It's because another aim of this conference is to encourage non-sectarian discussion and debate among broad sections of the left. We want to promote debate on a range of issues with the aim of reinvigorating intellectual engagement among left-wing thinkers in contemporary circumstances. We believe that discussion and argument are good and help us to strengthen our ideas, our theory, our ideology, and practice. We believe that if people just talk to those who agree with them, we will get nowhere. We will become lazy in our thinking. We won't be able to defend ourselves against others on the left, and we won't be able to defend ourselves against others outside the left. It's only by debate and by having our ideas challenged that we are forced to refine them. Hopefully, the debates will encourage us to share our views and to air our differences. But they should do this on the basis of engaging with ideas, not personalizing debates. Our thinking can only remain relevant if it is constantly tested and developed in debates. We need a vigorous and intellectually stimulating left-wing discourse in order to appeal to the working people and especially to the youth who tend to be curious and are searching for meaning in the world. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to see so many young people here today. What is the left? Okay. Let's ask that question. What is the left? I don't think it's very useful to dwell on this too much right now, but it's worth a moment's reflection just to remind ourselves what lies behind the label left. The left has traditionally been associated with those who sought to widen democracy and to eliminate exploitation. It seeks to create a society with greater equality, with decent work, and reasonable living standards for all, including the right to a good education, health care, social security, housing, recreational facilities, as well as a clean and healthy environment. We on the left believe that capitalism cannot provide these things on a sustainable basis, and that they can only be achieved through the establishment of a socialist society. As we all know, there are widely differing conceptions on what constitutes a socialist society and how it can be achieved. The left in the 20th century has been or was dominated by two major tendencies, both of whose roots lie in Marxism. Firstly, there's Marxism-Leninism, and then the other one is social democracy. Other less influential left tendencies like Trotskyism also have similar roots in Marxism. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the East European states in the period 1989 to 1991 dealt Marxism-Leninism a devastating blow, and it had an impact not only on those countries and the people who lived there, but it had an impact on the rest of the world as well, as Dr. Sithole has alluded to. We find in Europe and other parts of the world left-wing organizations who were anti-Soviet. They also somehow became immobilized after the collapse of the Soviet Union for reasons that I'm still not sure of, but it happened. The social democracy has suffered a less dramatic but nevertheless debilitating fate. Under the pressure of an aggressive neoliberalism in the post-Cold War period, the leaders of the social democratic parties shifted their political, their policies gradually but significantly to the right, to the point where they then became increasingly similar to liberal or conservative parties, to the point where you could hardly tell them apart. The people of some of the countries ruled by some social democratic parties have revolted recently. The Socialist Party in France has almost collapsed. The British Labour Party possibly could have suffered a similar fate, but it has been revived by a more left-wing trend now. We will find out how strong they are tonight, because today they're having their election. Even in countries where they never actually attained state power, but were strong forces, left-wing parties have also shrunk and their influence has declined. And this applies to both developed and developing countries. In the past quarter of a century, the left has floundered, to be honest, and has still not found a coherent ideology to guide mass political action anywhere, including in South Africa. The SACP is one of the few communist parties in the world whose membership has actually grown in the last 2 decades. But it is arguably now at a crossroads as it struggles to define its relationship with its alliance partners and to plot a way forward in the current difficult circumstances. Most other left political groupings in South Africa have not, at least until now, enjoyed widespread influence or developed a coherent national program or an effective organization. With the exception, I should say, of the EFF, and happy to see a lot of young EFF members here. But I must say, for me, the jury's still out on whether this is a left-wing organization or not. Okay? But as the conference proceeds, we will listen very carefully to the EFF people and to everybody else, and I'm sure that they too will listen carefully and debate with the rest of us, yeah. And when I say the rest of us, I don't mean the rest of us are all thinking the same thing. There are other groupings amongst us, yeah. There are various groupings. So globally, the left has been in retreat for the last 25 or 30 years. From the early 1990s, neoliberal ideology has gained hegemony throughout the advanced capitalist countries and in much of the developing world. And in the developing world, often through the agency of the international aid organizations, because they come with aid to the developing countries and they will give aid to those who agree with them. And so those people who want to collect aid tailor their policies to become acceptable. And you can't really blame them in many cases, because they are really poor countries. Neoliberal policies include the privatization of state enterprises and sections of the public service, the elimination of trade barriers, lower taxes for the wealthy and for corporations, the promotion of the market as the only effective means to incentivize production, and the exclusion of the state from the economy as much as possible. But ironically, when neoliberalism runs into trouble, as it did during the 2008-2009 crisis, it's the state that the capitalists turn to for help. We saw this in many examples, but I think I can think of 2 examples now, and that's the temporary nationalization of General Motors in the United States and of the Royal Bank of Scotland in the UK. Under neoliberalism, a parasitic financial sector has become the cornerstone of the world capitalist economy. Whereas in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the big forces in world capitalism were the producers of goods and services. Places like General Motors, Ford, the big steel companies, and so on. Now, power does not lie so much with them as with Goldman Sachs, with Barclays Bank, with JP Morgan, all the big financial institutions. That's where the real power lies today. And during the conference, possibly we'll have time to discuss why this is the case. So neoliberalism has led to the exacerbation of inequalities. Extreme poverty coexists with vast accumulations of wealth. A recent Oxfam report claims that the world's 8 richest individuals between them have the same wealth as the poorest 50% of the world population. That's 8 individuals have got as much wealth as, 3 to 4 billion poorest people. Many poor and middle-income countries have suffered deindustrialization and the loss of formal sector jobs. And this has contributed to an upsurge in unemployment and to rising numbers of people in non-formal, low-paying, dangerous and precarious work. And in South Africa, we are no strangers to this. People in various parts of the world, including even segments of the capitalist class, have begun to voice their dissatisfaction with the status quo, including through right-wing populism, the growth of nationalism, and xenophobia. The Brexit vote in the UK, the election of Trump, and the growing right-wing parties like the National Front in France and Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom in the Netherlands, as well as the BJP in India, they are all examples and point to the trend that could grow if not checked and could become extremely dangerous. The left has actually been less visible, but green shoots of a revival have become visible in the last few years in places such as Greece, Spain, the United States, around the Bernie Sanders campaign, Britain, around the ascent of Jeremy Corbyn to the leadership of the Labour Party, and a number of other countries. The left in Latin America has recently experienced setbacks, but it remains a substantial force. In South Africa, maybe it's too early to say what will emerge from these tumultuous days that we're going through. But although there are signs of new life in the left, they don't yet signify a sustainable renaissance. One of the things that we must discuss here is what can make it so. What can make it a sustainable renaissance. In a world of growing inequality, poverty, economic crises, and social instability, a strong, energetic, and visible left is more important now than it has ever been. So what are some of the challenges facing us today? The first and largest, in my opinion, is the issue of unemployment. In South Africa, we now have an official unemployment rate of 27%. Including discouraged work seekers, it's almost 37%. This is enormous. When the United States had an unemployment rate of about 33% in the 1930s, they called it the Great Depression. Here, it's almost like it's business as usual. This is a waste of human potential. It drives poverty and reduces over a third of our population to distress, to debt, and to crime. Despite all this, there is no union or association of the unemployed that can focus on their challenges and work to make job creation the country's #1 priority. Surely here there is a challenge for the left. We have to deal seriously with issues that have become more visible and more urgent since the early 90s. For example, how does the left integrate environmental issues into its programs? The profit motive among firms that want to maximize short-term profits can only be a threat to our environment. Other important issues that the left needs to integrate more fully into its programs are violence against women and children, and the marginalization of and discrimination against the LGBTI community and the disabled. Another vital challenge for the left is the changing social structure and what it means for the strategy and tactics and the building of alliances. Academics have studied the changing structure of society, but left organizations have so far paid only cursory attention to this research and have paid cursory attention to it in their thinking and their programs. We see the working class as the driving force of the revolution, or at least of a pro-socialist reform. In the past, though, we have normally thought about the working class in terms of blue-collar workers. That is the industrial proletariat, mainly those in manufacturing, transport, and mining. In the last 2 decades, however, a large stratum, sometimes called the precariat, has developed. It is made up of people in precarious work, some of them on the margins of the formal labor market, others never getting into it, but staying alive with non-formal, insecure work. I talk about people like car guards, beggars, waste pickers, street vendors, illegal miners, short-term contract workers provided through labor brokers to the construction and other industries, as well as others. This group of people has become enormous now, millions of people in South Africa. And then on the other side, there are sections of what is usually referred to as the middle class, who are now actually working class, and that they don't own the means of production and have no alternative but to work for others. In some countries, these groups, educated, disciplined, with organizational skills, and connected to each other through the social media, as I say, in some countries, they are the base of revolutionary, but in most cases, counter-revolutionary movements. We see this in the so-called color revolutions in Eastern Europe and in contemporary Venezuela, as well as other places. You saw the same thing in Brazil, by the way, with the anti-Dilma Rousseff movement. These new classes and strata, that's both the precariat and sections of the middle class, are seldom in the sights of the left when we are looking to recruit members, or when it comes to understanding their conditions of life and lifting their grievances. And if we are to pull them into the left, we need to start taking them much more seriously in our programs and in our analyses, of course. Community-level struggles have become widespread in both urban and rural areas, focusing on service delivery, on housing, corruption, municipal demarcations, education, and other issues. Yet in most cases, there is no involvement of national political organizations that can give them a more prominent role and to bring their voices together. SANCO exists, but its constitution allows only for individual members and not for communities or community organizations. I was looking at their constitution the other day, and I was rather surprised about this. And I wonder how you can be represent civic organizations when you don't have civic organizations as part of your membership, just individuals. Surely, community struggles must be a priority for us on the left. Internationalism, it used to be a core value of the left and central to the strategic thinking of the socialist and communist movements. Think, for example, of the slogan, "Workers of the World Unite," one of the earliest slogans of the left. We had the first and second and third internationals. We've had international solidarity organizations in the past with internationalist goals. I think of the anti-Vietnam War movement and the solidarity of the peoples of Vietnam. And Also, the anti-apartheid movement was one of the biggest international movements which exists. Few such movements exist anymore. The BDS campaign is one of the is a notable exception right now. But the left has now lost much of its internationalist character and has ceded internationalism to the neoliberals. They call it globalization. It has its own effective infrastructure of organizations such as the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, and the credit rating agencies, which are after all just quality assurance agencies for big financial capital. And of course, the neoliberals also have a highly developed and pretty sophisticated ideology which needs to be tackled. In South Africa, the lack of an internationalist ethic on the left can be seen in the almost complete disregard of the plight of refugees and immigrants from all over Africa. It's the churches who seem concerned about that, not the political left. Strangely, the left does not try to organize them into its structures. If we don't organize them, someone else will. And they could turn out to be a very reactionary force instead of a progressive one, which they have the potential to become. I must say that when I was in exile, I spent a few years in Canada, and I was a member there of the Communist Party of Canada. They built that party largely on the basis of immigrant groups who were coming to Canada from Eastern Europe. There were Ukrainians, there were Russians, there were Germans, there were Austrians, Serbs, and so on. All had their own kind of clubs, all part of the Communist Party. And in the United States, it was similar. And I'm sure in other countries where there are a lot of immigrants, it is the same thing, So I think there's actually potential in organizing the migrants who come to South Africa. With the current situation in South Africa, where the authority of the state is being usurped by clandestine, parasitic forces bent on plundering its resources, the left needs to collaborate with others. It can't function only on its own. This has already started to some extent. The SACP has been meeting with the South African Council of Churches and Save South Africa. It invited a number of non-alliance organizations to its recent Lekgotla and announced its intention to do the same for its Congress next month. There's also been much discussion about forming a united front by forces associated with NUMSA. The EFF has grown into a large and significant force in South Africa over just a few years. We don't know if they, Yes, we must applaud you too for a very significant achievement. I don't know if the EFF is thinking of alliances, of working with others, except for the DA, but I'm sure they will tell us more about that during the course of the conference. And the questions we need to face now, if we're going to build new cooperation among ourselves and with other significant forces, not only on the left, like, for example, some of the churches. Of course, not all the churches. Some of them are on the extreme right, actually. But we need to ask how this should be done. Who are the progressive forces that should be cooperating? What should be their aims? These are the questions which need to be tackled. Now, I've dwelt today on some of the challenges facing the left, not because I don't recognize our strengths and our potential, but because it is these and other challenges that must drive our agenda. I hope that this conference will be able to contribute to ways of strengthening the left and advancing the struggle for socialist solutions, because it is only the left the socialist struggle that can provide the necessary leadership to resolve the key challenges of our time. Thank you all. Yeah.
It was indicated to me that if I don't do this acknowledgement, I will lose my job on Monday. So I have to acknowledge that our funders, the National Skills Funds, are here. They are led by their CEO, Mr. Matsikama. He's together with Ms. Bongiwe Spengane and Mr. Mkize. And we would like the CEO just to come and say hello.
Program director, chairperson of the board, members from different organizations. Unfortunately, my voice is very bad at this point in time because of flu. We know at this time. And I'm not really here to speak, and also members from other political organizations that I'm seeing here. All I'm going to be saying is that I wish that the conference continues and deliberates on these very important matters that have been raised here by Dr. John Pambalis, and we will take forward the issues and resolutions that will emerge out of this conference and see how we build our society going forward. Thank you.
We are going to have the items now, the performances by Dumi Kumalo and another one by Abahlali Basemchondol. I'm not sure how we will be doing. Derek is going to give the announcement of how this is going to proceed. And yeah, etc. Thank you very much.
At our previous event, we hosted an artist who exhibited for his first time, and this time round we, as a center, moving away from the visual arts and focusing on classical and music, classical music and traditional protest music. Very often in the debates around decolonization, all things European are frowned upon as being colonizing. Dumisani Khumalo has chosen to be a classical music guitarist and has perfected the art as you will now hear. After him, we'll be followed by the Abahlali Basemjondolo choir, and the leader of the choir will briefly give a few words about the choir, who've been quite successful. So I'll call on Dumisani to come and do his performance.
Amandla. Qina mhlalo ohluphekile qina. Mayibuye. Siyawufuna lo mhlaba siyawufuna. We want our land back now. Comrades, bengithi anginivuse kuzwakala ukuthi makhona i-activist phambi kwenu kubonakale. Akuyena uprofessor lo, akuyena udokotela. I-comrade leli. Ithina esihlale emjondolo esikubona konke okwenzeka on the grassroots. Ngizonikwa nje umsebenzi omncane la. Angeke ngize ngesikhuluma isingisi ngoba bambala abantu abangasazi isingisi. I mean isiZulu. Kufuneka nabo ke bayihlupheke labo bangasazi isiZulu bazi ulimi lwethu kungabi ukuthi thina funa sazi ulimi lwabo bona bangayihluphi ngalolu lethu. Ngakho ke ngizo introduce lana ichoir yabahlali basemjondolo, ichoir lo mephambi kwenu by the way unobhala jikelele wabahlali basemjondolo. That's a very influential position. Yeah, comrades, I'm here to introduce the choir. All the women and the men that are going to be performing here are from Keto Crest, an informal settlement that was demolished more than 24 times by the eThekwini municipality. The very same government that we vote for still repress and oppress our own people. So that is a fact. We'll discuss that one day when you platform manfuna. Ngiyazi ukuthi there are comrades here. But umhlaba owethu whether bayathanda abathandi siyafuna ukuthi umhlaba wethu ubuye amalozi ethu abangathandi bathathe indiza babuyele la bevela khona. So by the way, the choir lenezo zaphambi kwenu seyirecordile berecord Fort Hare University recently. We're going to launch the album very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to introduce the women from the shared settlements in Keto Crest, abahlali basemjondolo choral. Ngicela nisukume bomama nobaba. Ngiyabonga.
Take Come, Sesosha, one song, please.
Masingona ima Afrika iyapeli mitaka sibini kokeliza batali siyapeli sizwe somtomnyama abeleli mitaka Masingona ima Afrika iyapeli mitaka apina makawe abatali siyapeli sizwe somtomnyama Mama wasani solo, sabetwa luvalo kanti, ukushona kwenkokeli siyapeli sizwe somtomnyama. Mama wasani solo, sabetwa luvalo kanti, ukushona kwamaqhawe siyapeli sizwe somtomnyama. Simutelo bunzima, sithetele ngayisomanda. Simutelo bunzima, sithetele ngayisomanda. Simutelo bunzima, sithetele ngayisomanda. Simutelo bunzima, sithetele ngayisomanda. Simutelo bunzima,
Ndiqalela ngaba